Hi, it's Heather, Business Development Lead for Co-operatives First. This webinar, Cultivating Welcoming Communities, was recorded on September 14th, 2022. To check out any of our upcoming webinars, just go to cooperatives1st.com/webinars.
Welcome up to the panel, Wendy and Ariel. So I just wanted to do a little round of introduction before we get going. So our panelists today are Wendy Petersen, from a community development analyst for Community Futures Westman, and a founding member of Hand in Glove, which is a community-based cooperative that provides newcomers with the opportunity to earn an income and meet new people and learn new skills. It's a pretty cool thing, and I think we will talk about it here. We also have a little profile of this as well on our blog at cooperatives1st.com. So I'll maybe post the link in here as well. This is a really interesting story, and also just an example of how you can kind of combine all of the things that you have going on in sort of interesting and new ways with sort of unexpected results. And so it's a really interesting story about connection. And then Ariel Haug is Gravelberg Economic Development Officer. Yeah, I did it. Baker artist and a member of the Gravelberg Artisan Cooperative. So that's a really cool cooperative located in Gravelberg. And I don't know if we have a story about this already, but I think it's, we'll use a couple of that example as well as, maybe others as well, about cultivating and creating welcoming communities. So other thing I wanted to say before we get sort of officially going is if you have questions, like I'm a big fan of just kind of like unburden yourself while you have them, put it in the chat so you don't forget, because like I forget everything. So if you have a question, put it in the chat. We'll get to it if we can afterwards, or if you want to like use the raise a hand function or unmute yourself and ask questions afterwards, we'll have some time to do that. Okay, so if you need or want more detail, if we don't like have time for questions, I'll just make sure everyone gets an answer, or if the question's like very specific about one thing, that just try to ask things that are related to kind of the whole group. So let's get started here on our panel. And the first question I wanted to ask about our topic is, sometimes immigration services can really, and I think I teased this before, can focus on physical needs of newcomers, like jobs and housing and even, childcare and all that sort of stuff, which is, super, super important. I mean, you really can't make it work without. But I wanted to ask about what else is important, because I think that will really frame the discussion that we're having here. So what can we miss if we're just focusing on physical needs? Wendy, do you want to answer that one first?
Sure. As Heather said, many times that becomes the focus when newcomers are arriving in a community, is that focus on where are we going to put them, what are they going to do for work, and many times there's not employment opportunities in smaller communities. For example, when we had Assyrians arrive in Brandon, even though we have a very large pork processing plant here, the Syrians, because of being Muslim and following Islam, can't work with pork. So it was really hard to find those jobs that would give them an income that they could step into. So, when I talk to newcomers, lots of times when I talk to newcomers that end up coming to a community and then end up leaving right away, I ask them, why did you leave? And that kind of answers some of the questions about, what other supports do we miss? And into that is lots of times is things around the children. Having, in the case of Syrians, having a Muslim school that's connected to a mosque, or even having a mosque, or having a place where they could, form a mosque. So that's always food, having the food that they're used to and having that available in a community. And it's tough when you're a small community and you've got a local grocery store, that now has to start to carry specialty items for a certain population. And that community connections, I mean, sometimes if you bring in one or two families, they'll form a connection between themselves, but sometimes it's not always necessarily enough, and they miss that larger connection and grouping. So, and there's just a lot of things around that social connection that they have. And so, doing some asset mapping of newcomers when they come in has been really valuable from my experience, getting to know them and their strengths, their backgrounds, their interests, what they did for jobs, lots of times you can tie those things into your community as a way to help them feel more at home and want to stay.
I just wanted to say I echo that. I was saying to the panel here that actually the job I worked at before here was at the Saskatoon Open Door Society. It's a settlement agency in Saskatoon for newcomers. And I found that people never looked sort of more alive as when they were, because I think you can kind of constantly feel like you're learning something new, which is exhausting. Like I always feel tired when I'm learning, like always just like new. But I operated a community garden program, and I just, as I watched people like just work with their hands in the dirt, it just felt like a sigh of relief. It's like this I know. So yeah. And Ariel, how would you answer that question about what can we miss when we just focusing on like sort of that physical needs?
Well, from my experience, it seems like what can be missing is just access to the information. Right, there are lots of things in terms of mental health care, in terms of social connection, in terms of the activities, sports and recreation and cultural arts opportunities for the children and for family members. But sometimes that information doesn't always get out into the pipeline, right? So I think what we're trying to do here more is establish more connections between people in the community who work with different groups of people to make sure that all that information is getting out to everyone, and not just to your long-term residents, or not just to one demographic like seniors, but to everybody, including the newcomers. So just making sure that those pipelines of information to get information on the services available are there. So yeah, and everything Wendy said.
I think it's true. So someone commented in the chat too that it's it's kind of this you can have, and I think it's like with a lot of things is sort of like the constellation of factors. I don't know if you could put it that way, but like he's saying, like if there's a great community where you have friends and you feel great, but there's no jobs, you're leave. But also if there's a job that's great and the community, that's all you got going for you, just the job, and no connection to community, it's the same thing, you're going to leave. So it's not usually like, okay, we have this but we don't have that. And I think that sort of the intention of this discussion isn't meant to be like, well, you for sure have all the jobs, so don't worry about them, just connect with people. I think it's just that seeing people as the whole person is something that building that maybe into economic development, and that kind of relates to our conversation. So I don't know, that's my 2 cents, but we'll figure it out as we go here more on. So I'm going to change the order, and I'll let Ariel answer first and then Wendy on this one. So let's talk about an initiative in your community that's purpose was to make people. So just want to talk examples. So what's an example of something? It's nothing quite like stories to convey. So what's something that happened where you created sort of a more welcoming place for newcomers and find it easier place to belong? So so Ariel, do you want to talk about a specific example first?
Sure, it's very fresh in my memory because we just had our first annual community expo on Monday. So we partnered with the school because they wanted to, after COVID, really, be open again to welcoming everybody from the community into that space and having it as a community space. So we invited every community-based organization, arts groups, sports and recreation groups, service groups like, the Lions and the Legion, and every sort of community-based organization that we could think of. And we also had the ESL teacher, come in and talk about second language education, and 4 different groups from Moose Jaw were represented, who deal the Multicultural Council of Moose Jaw, and the Moose Jaw Newcomer Welcome Center. They came down from Moose Jaw to speak to the services that they could offer in a slightly bigger, center, but we are all part of a region, so it fit well. So I had several purposes to this, one of which was to make sure to get the information out to the newcomer population. We have a college here that gives instruction in French for they have a nursing program and a welding program and a early childhood education program, and they attract a lot of international students. So we get an influx of about 20 to 25 international students per year. But one thing that had been expressed to me by the student liaison director was that they didn't know what our community had to offer. So he came to me when I first started my position back in November and said, can we find something to do that would showcase what this town has to offer for people coming from elsewhere? And I said, yes, definitely. Took me a while to get there, but and of course the COVID laws had to go. We had to be able to meet again and so forth. But yeah, so we got over 30 organizations participating as exhibitors, it was also an open house for the school. So we had a family participation as well as community-wide participation. I wasn't able to gauge our attendance, but it looked pretty well attended and I've had a lot of positive feedback. So that's my example for how we were trying, to create a welcoming community for everyone, and to even inform the residents of what we have, because sometimes they don't know what's going on either. So I do a lot in communications. So yeah, creating the welcoming space by providing an opportunity to take in everything that it has to offer.
I think that's maybe goes back to what it feels like to be new and not aware of the pathways and the people who are involved. Because maybe that's easy to take for granted if you lived in a place for a long time. Oh, everybody, you just talk to that person, then it's fine. Well, you don't. If and you never know, younger people or people who you wouldn't have normally considered, like they might be your next volunteer board director. You just don't know. So providing places for people to connect is really important. So getting them connected with. So I think that's a great thing. So Wendy, go ahead.
So I just wanted to say we've had several programs that have been involved here in Brandon and in Westman. But one of the things that we really focused on when we knew we had an influx of Syrians coming to our area is we did some pre-education with our community. So that means we brought in people that practiced Islam and were familiar with the Muslim culture. And we had an information night and invited anybody who wanted to join us so that they could come and learn about the people that were going to be arriving, learn about their customs, about their language, about their food, and feel free in a welcoming and safe environment to ask questions about their religion, about their food, about how they raise their children. So that made a really huge difference, because if you can prepare your community before, then some of those stigmas that are related to people coming that are new kind of erase themselves, because there's no excuse for people to have misinformation when you provide them with information. And then we also did a post-education night after the families arrived and had been here and settled for a little bit. We invited them to come and share their stories, share their food, again, with an open audience with Q&A. And that really bonded people together. One of the things that we do have here in Manitoba through the Mennonite Central Committee, and I'm not sure if it exists in other provinces, and it's very, very good exercise for people to go through. It's called the Forced Migration Simulation. So they're able to come and actually work through the process of being a refugee or an immigrant, going through the process of a refugee camp and how they would end up getting to Canada. So if anybody's interested in that, the Mennonite Central Committee here in Manitoba runs those workshops, and they are very, very enlightening. They make you see things in a completely different light that you don't even think about, what it's like to end up with the process of getting here. As Heather said in the very beginning, I started a co-op here called Hand in Glove Community Co-op. And it is a co-op that I set up, primarily thought that it would be immigrant women that I would be helping. But I set up a sewing program, and the program underneath the co-op is a social co-op, I call it. It's called so happy. And people come together and they do sewing projects. For example, we were making bread bags that we were reselling in the community, but it ended up that it was bringing the youth in and not so much the women. I had a few women, but the majority of my members in the co-op right now are youth, aging anywhere from 10 to 25, and a few women and a few men. I mean, it's one of those things where you'll build it and they will come. Well, they came, but Wendy didn't think about that she doesn't know how to sew. So I had to kind of stop myself and go, okay, now I've got a problem. Anyways, I enlisted the community kindness and the blessing of the Hutterite community that lives around me, and they would send in 4 or 5 volunteers every Saturday to work with the people that were there and produce the products. And it was just a beautiful thing to see. The mixing of the cultures, the learning about each other. We went for a tour in the colony. You know, we brought in food that people could share from different cultures. So it was really, really amazing. And, you know, just like I said in the first part, that asset mapping of those newcomers when they come in, don't be afraid to ask them about their culture. Don't be afraid to express that you don't understand something about them. They enjoy that. They enjoy people wanting to know and wanting to be engaged. It makes them feel like you want them in your community. You know, assumptions never end very well for anybody. So, you know, if they're having a ceremony, if they're having an EAD ceremony, that was the most amazing ceremony I ever attended, was to see 100 people praying and then sharing their food with the community. You get such a sense, and they really appreciate that. They appreciate the fact that you want to learn about them and you want to be engaged with them, and then they'll ask you about yours as well. So it's a great sharing. Just, you know, always asking questions and finding passions that are similar between people.
I love the example of hand in glove. This is definitely something I would do too, which is basically like, okay, we're gonna do sew problem, no problem. Okay, wait, I don't know how to sew, so what do I do? But it was almost like the not knowing how to do something was the thing that allowed the connection to be made, because you connected the group with the Hutterite women, and the sort of there was this mutual understanding shared. And I don't want to get like too grandiose here, but just forgive me for a second, as I think that, you know, in light of the past 2 years of distancing and being online, and this, you know, I'm thankful for this environment because we can connect, but there is something so necessary about the only way to change your mind and to understand somebody else is just through the like witness. I think just to be partial or see the experiences in the sort of day-to-day of others, that we're never going to figure this out by arguing online on sort of an intellectual level. We just have to spend time with people. And so I guess if there was one takeaway, I would just say, like, just spend time with people. I don't know, maybe that's a little too loosey-goosey. And that will lead into my next question, which is that sometimes this business of like creating community, creating belonging, and all of this seems a little bit like, I don't know, forced, or it's just like, those people are good at it. That person's really great at hosting and hospitality or whatever, just sort of downplaying it as like a personality traits that some people have, and we're just sort of relying on them to make it work. But what I wanted to say is that it takes work, it takes intention, and it takes attention to something to kind of create community. And so I guess this is kind of more a question on like how to sell it. I'm not sure, to like to other people. It's like, you know, how do we kind of put that in the thing where it's like, okay, this has value, that creating things to help people belong and feel understood is has value. That kind of makes sense. I rephrase the question a little bit, so I hope that makes sense. So Wendy, I'm switching the order. I'll go through.
Yeah, I think kind of going back to what I said before, community, whether it's your community or the blending of communities, they all start with an understanding, addressing misconceptions sometimes. And I have said this before. Many times communities don't gel because they don't understand the people in their community. They have misconceptions or assumptions about the people that are living there or are coming there. So, you know, there's so many success stories out there and so many communities that, you know, have proven that they can bring people in and be very welcoming. And, you know, most of that revolves around, in my opinion anyway, is not trying to be everything for everybody. You're not going to be able to cover all the bases. You're not going to be able to cover all of the needs and the services that they have. And lots of that is, don't worry about doing that. Ask questions. Ask what those people are needing. Lots of times I've worked in the settlement sector, and lots of times we assume that we knew what people needed. And sometimes we got it right, and you put a few things in place. But I'd always say to my team, don't worry about every little detail, because every little detail is going to be different for each group, and it's going to be different for each individual. And the power of observation is really, really important when welcoming somebody from another country into your community. You know, what do you see them struggling with? What do you see their children struggling with? And, you know, those first few weeks that they're in your community, they're just basically in survival mode. There's different stages. If you work in settlement, they tell you there's different stages, the first phase is kind of the honeymoon phase, where everything is new and different, and everybody's bringing you stuff, and you're feeling just great. And there's that euphoria that's just rolling through you. And then this reality starts to settle in. Okay, now I've got to get my kids into school. And what kind of problems or situations or challenges are they going to meet there? I really like to find a job. How am I going to do that? So it's not easy. It's involving a lot of different parties, but mostly it's involving the newcomers and keeping the whole process very organic, letting it flow and ebb and flow, and not, be so determined in what you're going to say or do with people, and let those ideas go back and forth. That's the greatest learning, that learning and sharing from each other.
Ariel, what about you? I mean, you just mentioned this whole event was to connect people with resources and to sort of like create an atmosphere of community that had been missing. So why was that important?
Yes, well, and I'm just loving what I'm hearing from Wendy. Those are it's a really good point. And I think that, I mean, as an event, this is sort of our inaugural event of this sort of nature. We'd had sort of more specific, sports and recreation registration events, but this was a real community expo. We really wanted to show that off. But that's sort of like the widespread, like that's trying to get everybody in one big net. So I really like Wendy's point about okay, keep things open. Don't try to do everything all at once. Because this is like the big general effort, but I think that sometimes, what could be more effective, is the direct effort, right? There's a woman in our community who I know, she invites people to her house, into her home, and to have a dinner, right? She'll do that for new residents. And I think I can recall when my children were much younger, most towns have a tot spot, a group, mom and baby kind of thing. And for me as a newcomer, as a new resident, it was really important in connecting me with the wider community. I found out about the tot spot. I went there. And I met friends there. And I remember later on when I was the facilitator, I became the facilitator of this group a couple of years later. And it was a real opportunity to invite people, young mothers from the community to come to that group as well. And it was a great opportunity for a couple of our residents to practice English and also meet people. And it's sort of that direct interaction, like here's something that might be a great opportunity for you, that personal invitation to do something and to join in something. Another part of the expo was we were trying to have a bit of a volunteer drive, but a sneaky one. So our idea is to have volunteer your time on your terms, right? This was my marketing pitch. To capture those residents and, those long-term residents who, maybe don't want to join a board because nobody wants to do that, or think they don't have any time, but maybe they can give a few hours. But also to reach out to anybody who wants to volunteer, but doesn't want to make a commitment, trying to, hand sell that to newcomers as well. Like, hey, here's something you can, come participate in, for a couple hours and see if it's something you enjoy, right? So I think sort of like that direct sell aspect, can be an important part of cultivating, welcoming community.
Yeah, definitely. If you don't have a program for moms who've just had children, start one, because it's a really tough time, I'll be honest. Mom and children, it can be very stressful and isolating, and just like, I think like missing those networks that you already had established and just not knowing how to find them is, establishing new kind of connections with people is just, there's really something that you can do to, I don't know, to help people feel like they belong. And those moms later, when their kids are older, are going to be your best source of volunteers, and like a lot. They're going to help you out in the long run. So build into their lives at an early stage. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more like sort of about bits of supports, actual support services and things like that. So I just wanted to, wanted to bring up this, and I think I sort of didn't want to say it in these words, but I'm going to say it anyways. I think what can happen sometimes, and I said the context here is we're talking about communities that are not major centers. We're not talking about, the sort of destination. We're not, and that's great if you are that, then, good for you. But I think, not everyone's going to come from a major, and what I wanted to talk about is how you, as a place, a town, village, rural area, or whatever, maybe you don't have all the support services, or maybe you have some of them, or maybe you need people because you got jobs, or, whatever, there's immigration because, you need certain types of jobs. But I think sometimes what can happen is that you feel like you're that first step. So I guess it's like, how do we position ourselves as not the first step on the way to another destination? How can we be the destination? You're not going to be the destination for everyone. Again, that's totally fine. But what are the services that are needed? So you're not just, the first step. So what's the order here? So Ariel, do you want to answer that one first, and I'll end with Wendy?
Yeah, well, something funny that came up in our staff meeting here today was that we are looking for people to work in our public works department. If you know anybody, send them to Gravelberg. But we have a lot of some of the international students, they're very interested in having one of these positions, but they don't have their Class 5 driver's license. We used to offer driver training here pre-COVID. And so the instructor would be here once a week and they could do the test and everything. And it was, we have an insurance agency in town. Now post-COVID, it's just disappeared, right? They haven't come back to offer that service to our community. And so I'm thinking, well, I got to get this back, because here's just something really simple that's keeping individuals from obtaining employment, which they seek, right? So that was just a little light bulb that went off for me this morning. Like, oh, I gotta contact XGI, the driver training, and figure this out, because we have to direct them somewhere else to go and take this test. So little things like that. Also, we want to keep younger people here in these towns. Like Gravelberg's classified as a retirement community. And certainly we have our share of senior citizens. There's lots of young families. There's a great, decent sized school, and a lot of, we have international students coming in, young families. We want to keep them here instead of them going somewhere else. So, for, the 20 somethings, we want to show, hey, there are things to do here. You don't have to go to a city to have fun. Like maybe you find an organization, recreational or cultural that really fits your passion, and that's how you find your social life, right? Sort of showing other ways that, we don't have all the variety of a larger center, but there are lots of things that you can be involved in here that would be satisfying. So yeah, those little details, like practical things, but also making sure that you establish like all the possibilities there are for in small town life, and different ways to have fun socially that aren't necessarily, all the exciting things of the big city. Not that we're that close to any big city, but close enough to Moose Jaw for it to be much more interesting than here. But, so yeah, that's what we're working on.
People can still drive for that concert every once in a while, like no big deal, you know, they'll go to Regina or whatever. But I mean, ultimately, if you trace it back to like, what is the desire? I guess maybe the desire is for like that connection, a group of people that they can just get together. Maybe that's right for them. Like you mentioned, yeah, trying to consider the international students that you have in your town to just see them as more like a potential future resident of your town, not just in and out transaction. It's cool. Okay, Wendy, go ahead.
So sometimes when we welcome people, like I guess people would assume that they don't or are not interested in activities in which we participate in, you know, swimming, curling, skating, all those recreational activities. So it's really important to take the time to give them the opportunity to participate in those things, not just assume that they're not interested because, you know, they're seeing their very first snowfall, which when you watch somebody who's new to this country and you watch them watch their first snowfall, you will never forget it. It is just the most magical experience. I remember taking a group of Syrian youth to the Christmas train when it came through Brandon. And they were just like overwhelmed by the train and the snow and drinking their hot chocolate from Tim Hortons. And I know that all sounds kind of corny, but it was just wonderful to watch them embrace their, you know, where they were and where they've come from. And sometimes we think that they're not going to participate in these activities when in fact they're really interested in what we have to offer to make them feel like it's a community. So, you know, exposing your community and blending your cultures with their cultures is so important, and allowing them to feel that they're safe and you can do that in a safe space. One of the things that comes up in smaller communities, and I hear this all the time through Community Futures, is the whole idea of succession planning. You know, smaller communities have businesses that someone is retiring or, you know, someone has decided to sell their business. And because I'm a big pusher of co-ops, we talk about the investment co-op model. And it's been successful in places like Saguto, Alberta, for example, where, you know, the town has come together, formed an investment co-op and bought the business in order to continue the business running and bringing in young people. The same thing can be used to bring in immigrant families as well, who want to then run businesses in your community. You know, just having the opportunity for people to be able to do that and making sure that as a community and as a council and or, you know, as a town council, you're thinking about that when you hear about someone who wants to sell their business. You know, what is the backup plan? What is the plan of the community? It's not just the plan of the person who's selling that business. Your community is going to lose big time seeing that business close its doors. And if there's any way as a community you can invest in that, like an investment co-op, and purchase it and bring in a young family or an immigrant family, they're going to stay, they're going to build, they're going to live there, they're going to bring their children there. Many of them bring more people over when they get here and they make, you know, good. My friend from Eritrea was going to come on to the webinar today, and I said no, because I knew he'd try to take over. So, but I asked him last night. He's been in Brandon now for 13 years. And I asked him last night, I said, like, why do you come? Why do you come and why do you stay? And I'm going to read you what he said to me. And his English is still, it's pretty good, but he says, I like Brandon. It's clean, it's quiet, good for families, good path for starting a business. There are very nice and helpful people in Brandon. I like the small city. It is the best place to create a family. And that's how he feels. That's how he feels in his heart when he goes to work every day. He has a grocery store just down at the end of the block from me here, but he works at Maple Leaf full time. And his wife and him just announced that they're having twins. They've been trying for a long time. So he's a leader in his community. Every Eritrean that comes here, he finds them a job at Maple Leaf and they stay. They don't go because they've got that connection. One of the things he did say to me was, if I need anything, I have friends. And he says, and they're not just within my community. I have friends. I have friends like a group called Refuge Brandon here in Brandon we can reach out to. He's got me, he's got other people that he can reach out to if he doesn't understand something or he needs to apply for something. And I think it's just making yourself available and open to be able to do that for everybody that comes into the community.
Thanks so much. I'm glad that you asked your friend that question directly. I'm happy that he belongs and feels like he belongs so well, and is part of your community. And someone said, Robin Lee said in the comments about mentioning that, there's programs for kids learning how to skate and things like that, but sometimes, we forget about adults. Like it's really like learning new skills as an adult, it's like a weird thing, right? Like you're like, I'm gonna learn something brand new. But why not, right? Like why not offer skating, learn to skate, or just like even a skating night with hot chocolate and just like offer people some lessons and provide the skates, for crying out loud. Like people can't afford to buy skates, just do try skating one time. So yeah, that's a really kind of cool way to bring people together. And I asked like organize, do all this stuff, but bringing people together is the essence of this, because that is what's going to promote and provide the connections between people. So we're giving a forum to do that, and hoping something great comes out of it. So I want to have a little bit of another discussion time. We've only got a few minutes, but that's okay. Thank you so much to Wendy and Ariel for sharing your wisdom and thoughts on this topic. And it really kind of put us in the right headspace to be thinking about these things. And what I want to do is just bring the topic back to the top of mind. It's probably like on a list of 100 things that you're thinking about, but just to get maybe inspired on this topic will maybe bring something new or put a connection in your mind that you hadn't thought of before. So that's what I really hope happens. And I know that Wendy and Ariel really set the stage for that today. So thanks so much for being part of this webinar.